You've learned nothing.
Don't say that.
I gave you a choice. Live or die.
There was a time in our culture when everyone loved Game of Thrones. Not just the culture here in the West, but all around the world. You could say it was one of those TV shows that signified a new milestone in entertainment. Gone were the days when television hit its peak at cheap CW adaptations. Game of Thrones felt like a cinematic experience every week, and everyone knew it was awesome. There may have been a few who didn't like it, or it just wasn't their thing, but overall it was beloved, and what made it so great?
You gonna say something clever? Go on, say something clever.
Well, of course it had all the bells and whistles to get people talking, great choreography, impressive special effects, top-notch acting, but I think at the heart of it all was the writing. The characters were interesting, and the story was compelling. When the time came for there to be a scene of shock to subvert our expectations, in spite of how it made you feel, it all made sense. You could hate and love the characters, but either way, we understood them. And then the cracks started to show. Then Season 5 came out, which was still pretty good overall, but some of the more astute critics began to notice that there were a few cracks beginning to show in the writing. Then Season 6 came along, and the hype was still there, but those cracks started to get bigger and bigger. And then Season 7 happened, filled with moments of excitement and awe, but other scenes where you had to either ignore it by telling yourself, this is Game of Thrones, how could it be bad? Or admitting that something was seriously wrong with our beloved TV show. And then Season 8 happened.
You're a dragon. Be a dragon.
Shit, Negro, that's all you had to say.
You one crazy ass bitch!
Funny thing is, Season 8 still had all the bells and whistles. In fact, I'd say it had even more. The dragons looked cooler than ever, the army of the dead had finally breached the wall, all of our favorite characters that we've been following for almost a decade have assembled in one place, and yet, in spite of all that, something very important was missing. The thing that had slowly diminished over time was the writing, and that's all it took to turn the greatest TV show of all time into the biggest bomb, memed for generations to come. Funny thing though, is there are still people who defended it. They defended it until the last episode, and some even defended it to this day, saying that it's still an amazing show that ended in a great way. You had all the reactions of people watching the big screen and screaming at the top of their lungs about how excited and awesome everything was, without ever giving a second thought to what they were actually watching. Sure, it's a matter of subjectivity, and you can still enjoy the final season, but at least half of the fan base didn't. I'd even say a lot more than half. I believe that after that train wreck of a last season, that Game of Thrones was forever dead, that it could never recover, that any planned spin-offs would be dead on arrival. But guess what? There was a spin-off, a show called House of the Dragon. And you know what? It was actually kinda good. Don't get me wrong, it's not as great as the first 4 or 5 seasons as Game of Thrones, but it's not bad. And I'm actually pretty excited for Season 2. And you know why I'm so excited? Because the writing is good. Again, it has all the bells and whistles. Season 1 of House of the Dragon, as you might expect, has dragons. which is pretty awesome, and they look really cool. It also had good actors as well as interesting set design, and all the production value was top notch. But none of that would matter if the story was stupid and the writing sucked. And if that was the case, then Season 2 would probably be dead on arrival. It just goes to show you that even if you have a popular IP that everyone has loved and you do end up screwing it up, you can still bounce back from it. I'd be willing to bet that they've won a few fans back. I'm proof of that, at least. And even though they have a long way to go, there's actually some potential that this spin-off series could raise the world of Game of Thrones back up to what it used to be, or at least something close to it. You see, the thing about fandom is that we're passionate about what we love, and we get pretty upset whenever the thing we love is taken away from us and is completely destroyed, and we're then accused of being toxic for having felt that way about it. With all that being said, let's talk about Star Wars. But first, if you like this video and you're a fan of my content, please do consider hitting the like button and maybe subscribing. It's free and only takes a few minutes to make an account with YouTube. You can also hit the bell icon and be notified whenever my new videos drop. I cover Western media like in this video, but I also cover some anime and a bit of gaming as well, and I really do appreciate your support. So with all that out of the way, let's get into it.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground! You underestimate my power! Don't try it!
There was a time in our culture when everyone loved Star Wars. People lined up in the streets to go see it. They were cultural events that signified a new milestone in entertainment. Granted, the original trilogy came out a bit before my time, but I can definitely empathize with people who grew up with it. I used to talk about Star Wars with a friend I used to work with. He was a bit older than me, about middle-aged or so, and he would tell me about how he remembered seeing it for the first time when he was a kid. And I remember seeing the way his face lit up when he talked about seeing Episode 4, A New Hope, for the first time. It was super cringy and gay, to be sure, but you could tell it was something that he would never forget, and it made a huge impact on him as a kid, kind of like 9/11 did for me. Suffice it to say, they were special, and of course, they had all the bells and whistles that you'd expect from a big budget film. But at the heart of the story was the writing, namely that of Han, Luke, and Leia. Everyone loved these characters and were invested in their lives and the journey that they were on together. But then the cracks started to show. I suppose you could argue that this started with the prequels. They had awesome special effects, but the writing definitely took a dip, not to mention some piss-poor acting.
They're dead. Every single one of them. And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
But at the end of the day, they still kind of felt like Star Wars. Like I said, it had some cringe moments, but it also had some pretty cool stuff in there too. They're not great movies by any means, but compared to what we're getting today, it's like comparing Shakespeare with third grade finger painting. Which leads me to Episode 7, The Force Awakens. I believe that in spite of a lot of the disdain that the prequels get, it was really here in Episode 7 where the problems in Star Wars began to seriously take effect. But at the time, the fan base was still passionate. Most of the normies and the fans alike were just happy to have Star Wars back. And even though things in the universe far, far away seemed oddly different, most people were happy and eager to see what they would do with Luke in Episode 8. And then The Last Jedi happened. And all these issues and concerns that the fanbase had were validated, and not only did more cracks in the universe form, the entire fanbase was ripped right down the middle. It was Game of Thrones Season 8 levels of bad. And looking back at Episode 7, The Force Awakens, with honest eyes, most people began realizing that this wasn't really much even better. Stupid writing, overpowered girl bosses, preachy social messaging, a non-adherence to the lore, an absolutely retarded plot, and a complete destruction of legacy characters. It was like taking a kick in the balls from God himself. And now Lucasfilm at this time was at a crossroads. Kathleen Kennedy and her favorite little puppy dog, also known as Basketball Head, could have reevaluated what they've done. They could have seen the backlash and went, "Hey guys, maybe we messed up here. Why don't we back up for a second and fix what we've screwed up?" Of course, we all know they didn't do that. They just doubled down, called all the fans toxic, and proceeded to squeeze out of their gaping bungholes a crapfest that we all know as the Rise of Skywalker. It went over about as good as you'd expect. But even when they rammed everyone in the ass for a third time, after The Rise of Skywalker, the fans were still engaged. Sure, everyone was upset, but everyone was still willing to talk about the movies, give their critiques, and evaluate what Star Wars had become. As bad as everything was, most of the fan base was still hopeful, or at least maybe half of the fan base, if I'm being generous, was still hopeful that Star Wars could make a comeback. That they could bounce back from the horrible films and these horrible decisions and these choices in spite of constantly being insulted by the people who created the films. After a while, Disney Star Wars announced that they would begin streaming on Disney+, several spin-off shows in the Star Wars universe. Unfortunately, these really weren't any better. Some of them had decent moments, but they were bland. They were boring. They didn't have very interesting characters whatsoever. There were even a few films released in the theaters, but they were just more of the same. Just uninteresting characters, more social messaging, and PC politics pushed in. And Disney pretty much took every opportunity they could to revive legacy characters, only to crap all over them and turn them into something that they never were. I mean, for example, everyone remembers what they did with Lando, right? Who would have thought that when watching the original trilogy that in the future he would become a pansexual attracted to machines and robots. And so, after several years of Disney Plus content being released, or maybe I should say vomited out, we finally got to the point to where fans really weren't angry anymore. Fans aren't screaming and shouting. The fan base of Star Wars today just doesn't really care. And that's how you know Star Wars is dead. Basically, the point I'm trying to make with this video is that whenever they went off the rails and began to really screw things up with the writing and the characters, they actually still had a chance to bounce back and win back the fan base. Because fans were still interested. Sure, everyone was pissed off, but they were still engaged and still loved Star Wars. But now it's grown to the point of apathy. And apathy is what truly kills a franchise. It's kind of like that episode in The Office, you know, that TV show that's one of the best TV shows of all time. It's whenever Jim takes a job in Philadelphia, there begins to be a lot of tension in him and Pam's marriage. They start fighting more often, and eventually Pam goes to Brian, one of the guys working with the team of people who've been recording them over all these years, and breaks down and cries. Later on, Brian meets with Pam and Jim and tells them how he and his wife's own marriage is falling apart. Jim tries to encourage him by telling him that couples fight, but you can still work things out. And Brian responds by saying this.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When we were fighting, it weirdly felt like the relationship was still alive, and it wasn't until we stopped fighting that we realized it was over. It's over.
By the end of the episode, Jim wants to cancel their Valentine's Day dinner and just go back to Philadelphia instead. However, after seeing how Brian's relationship turned out and not wanting her and Jim's relationship to end in the same way, Pam tells him this.
I don't think you should go to Philly tonight. I think that you should stay, and I think we should fight.
You really want to fight on Valentine's Day?
Yeah, I do.
She knew that even though having fights aren't exactly healthy in a relationship, it does mean that the passion is still there, that both parties care enough about the relationship to fight, and that's a good thing overall and shows that there's hope moving forward. But when apathy sets in and you don't even care anymore, then that's the end of it. And that's where Star Wars is right now. Fans just don't care anymore. It doesn't matter how much key jangling Lucasfilm does, it doesn't matter how many callbacks or flashbacks or fancy lightsaber battles that are put on the screen, people just don't care anymore. Everyone is black-pilled, and now we've come to an end of the road in the last release of the D+ Star Wars show, called Ashoka, also known as Cardboard Box. In this series, we're introduced to Anakin's apprentice, Cardboard Box, and her many facial expressions, also starring interesting characters like purple-haired Mary Sue, Granny Sith, Soy Cuck the Jedi, the ditzy green donut, and the most based and probably the best character in the entire show, the robot. Just thinking about the show makes me want to fall asleep.
I never had the talent, the abilities, not like Ezra.
That much is true.
Nothing interesting happens. The fight choreography looks like it was designed by high schoolers in the drama department. Character motivations are selfish, and the main characters come across more often than not like villains than they do actual heroes or Jedis. And the actual villains, who are supposed to be intellectual and intimidating, like overweight dad bod Smurf King, just come across as completely incompetent, acting like they're evil and pretending as if they're in control of the situation when in reality they're just acting like a bunch of morons. They kind of remind me of Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, for example.
Now, we have 3 parachutes. This one's for me, and these 2 are gifts for my nephews. Tally-ho!
This has to be one of the dumbest Star Wars shows that I've ever seen. Probably why it's one of the least watched out of all the Disney Plus Star Wars shows that have come out recently. So if you were thinking about watching this one, you probably would be better served watching YouTubers who have painstakingly sat through every single moment of every single episode and are doing breakdowns of why the entirety of the plot and the characters are completely retarded. Suffice it to say, I thought it sucked. And pretty much in almost every episode I find myself doing something else, tuning out, or just simply feeling my eyelids getting heavy and starting to pass out from sleep. I mean, sure, there are YouTubers that have done reactions to each episode that come across as positive and excited, but overall, whenever you watch these reactions and these commentaries that are more positive in nature, to me, they always come across as artificial. Kind of like they would have the exact same reaction if you put any kind of dribble in front of them. No matter what they're watching, they're going to hype it up and get excited because that type of content is easy to create and it ends up getting a lot of views. Of course, if you were to ask any of these YouTubers the very next day what happened in the episode or why it was so exciting, they would give some bland, generic response and just be excited about the new next thing that comes out recently. In other words, their reactions are completely fabricated. They're not genuine. They're not real. They're popular, but that's about it. And whenever you do get these kinds of excited reactions, it's only whenever they dig up legacy characters. The old key jangling tactic that always works on normies because everyone knows who Darth Vader is. Everyone knows who Anakin Skywalker is. But when it comes to real fans, that is, fans who have been fans of Star Wars probably their entire lives, this kind of stuff just doesn't work anymore. Apathy has set in, and Star Wars is just boring. They had a chance whenever fans were upset. They had a chance when people were angry, because at least then people still cared. Sure, it was anger and frustration, but it all came out of passion and love for these characters. But now everyone is just tuned out and are interested in other things. So whenever Disney releases a new Star Wars movie or TV show, people don't even bother with it anymore. And there's no amount of key jangling in the world that's going to fix it. And that ultimately is why Star Wars is dead. Anyways, guys, tell me what you think. Is there anyone out there who's actually interested whenever they release a new series? Has anyone watched Ahsoka? Or are you just watching YouTubers break it down and tell you how bad it is? Also, in your opinion, do you think that Disney Star Wars could actually do anything to bring this lifeless husk up from the grave and instill new life within it? Do you think there's any hope to make Star Wars good again? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and as always, if you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. It really does go a long way to help out the channel, and I really appreciate it. And so, as always guys, thanks so much for watching, and have a great freaking day.